For my final project, I decided to implement collisions and landing gear. For this, I use Unreal Engine to give me a penetration depth for each collision point as well as the normal vector. Unreal will give the normal vector in the earth frame, so I transform that into the body frame and normalize it. And then I find a penetration depth rate by just taking a backward finite difference with the current penetration depth and then the previous penetration depth with over a delta t. Then I find a spring force here with the constant k and the penetration depth I get from Unreal. Multiply that by the normal vector to get a force vector. Do the same, do a similar thing for the damping force here with this damping constant and the penetration rate. And then for a friction force, I first find uh, the velocity of the contact point. So this is just the velocity of the aircraft, and then the rotation rates of the aircraft, and then the location of the contact point. I separate that into normal and tangential components because I set up a friction model so that the rolling friction can be separate from the side force, um, trying to model how the friction of a tire rolling versus skidding to the side. Find those friction forces, and then I sum together all of these forces, so the spring, the damping, and the friction. Find the moment, and then I sum all of the contact forces and moments together. In my simulator input file, I've defined these collision points. I have landing gear collision points and then some general collision points around the aircraft. All of them have these components: a location, spring, dampener, and friction coefficients, and then a maximum force to determine if the aircraft should explode. In Unreal, I've defined the general contact points and the landing gear points here. So you can see as I'm clicking on these points are just defined around the aircraft. And then I'm able to do a line trace and to get the penetration depth and the normal vector. And when I run this, I have these line traces displaying just so you can see what's happening. So each of these contact points are making this line trace, which will report a collision. As you can see, I've also added a HUD where I can move my control surfaces around and have animations. I also have speed brakes here that I've added. This is just to help with landing. I have this speed brake implemented into my physics where if it's enabled, the physics will just modify the drag coefficient. This isn't accurate, but I'm just using this to help slow me down so I can test landing a little better. If I run a sweep with the aircraft, we can see how the blending model with stall and the wind tunnel NASA results look. This is with the shifted aerodynamic reference location, so we can see at a high angle of attack, the lift drops off with the stall model. Same thing with drag. We have that parabola that then shifts into the stall model. Same thing with the moment, where this is a little different because I have the aerodynamic reference location shifted by 1 foot. And here's the landing. And you can see I'm using those speed brakes there just to help me slow down a bit. And you can see as this is getting a lot slower, it's starting to bounce around quite a bit. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe I just need to tune my spring mass dampener a little better, or it's something on the Unreal side with the penetration depth. But I am able to land and completely stop and take off again. You can see I have landing gear also. And there's the explosion. And cesium will load in collision data for all the buildings too, so it's fully interactive with the buildings. It's a little hard to show the other collision points since it just explodes immediately. You can see I'm landing on a runway here that's perfectly flat just to make it a little easier. It can land on the cesium terrain, but the cesium terrain's a little bouncy and not as high fidelity as like this runway asset, so it's a little harder. And something interesting is I'm actually having to run this inside the Unreal editor. If I try to run this with the executable or even in full screen in the editor, this doesn't work for some reason. The landing is super bouncy and it doesn't dampen out. So something weird there. It took me a long time to figure that out. But so yeah, so I'm having to run this in the editor for some reason. So thinking about ways to improve this, the big one is tuning. I kind of just guessed with the spring mass dampener gains, so that's a big way to make this perform a lot better. Obviously, I got to figure out the full screen thing, and I'd like to get this working a little better with the cesium tiles, just so it's a little more interactive with the environment. Otherwise, the collision logic is working great. It's really easy to add other contact points, so I could even add weapons and missiles and all sorts of cool things. So with that, that's my final project. Hope you enjoyed.